case something would ever happen. But back in those days, if they thought about a possible attack, they imagined that that would come by ship, so coming from the water, from the harbour. When it came to Darwin's defence, they therefore then focused on its coastline, and East Point here being along the coast and also forming the mouth of the harbour. You can imagine this was quite a strategic point. So different things were set up in this area here, including some gun emplacements. I'll be able to show you one a bit further down the road, but that's a structure that could hold a large gun that was then facing the harbour, which would have been great if an attack did indeed come by ship, but of course that didn't happen, it came by plane. And those air raids, they started on the 19th of February in 1942. That was the first time that the Japanese bombed Darwin, and they did that because Darwin was the biggest city in the north of Australia with a big harbour and military sites. The Navy, Air Force and the Army were all up here. So Darwin was used as a base to supply goods and troops to the north where most of the war was taking place. They wanted to stop that from happening, and that's why Darwin was under attack. On that first day there were two devastating air raids. For the first one, aircraft carriers were used, the same aircraft carriers that they had used at Pearl Harbor about 10 weeks earlier. And 188 planes were sent this way from those aircraft carriers, and then later in the day there was a second air raid. At that time it was 54 land-based planes that were flown this way, so they were the heavier bombers. And with those two raids they caused a lot of damage to the city. They injured about 300 to 400 people, and the number of people who lost their lives that day, they're not even quite sure. It all depends on what memorial you're looking at, what book you're reading, and when that was written. But these days they have a list that has close to 300 names on it. So that seems to be the official number they go by, but they're not quite sure if that list is complete or not. Now it was the start of a long period of air raids from then on. So from February 42 it continued until November 43. So that's a period of 21 months. And in that time, in the Darwin region here alone, there were 64 air raids all up. None of them as devastating as the ones on that very first day, but it did continue for a long time, and there was more damage and more people did lose their lives. At the time, a lot of it was kept quiet, so people living in other parts of the country were not aware of all these air raids. But also after the war, it's taken a very long time for information to become available. And it is only more recently now that people are starting to get aware of what actually happened in the north of Australia during the war, that Darwin was bombed more often than just on that first day. And of course it wasn't just Darwin that was under attack, it was the whole north of the country. About 100 air raids all up, but yeah, 64 of those here on the top end of the territory. So there's a lot of reminders of that all around Darwin and all around the top end, because of the air raids, but also because of the military activity that was then taking place here because of that. And here at East Point there's an interesting museum if you'd like to find out a bit more about what actually happened back in those days. Coming up on our left in a moment you'll see the military museum, which is well worth a visit. It's been there for a long time, since the late 60s, but then last year with the 70th anniversary of the bombing of Darwin, they've added a whole new building to it, and it has a lot of excellent information in there. So, as I said, well worth a visit. It's open every day. It's $14 to go in there. To get here you'd have to organize a taxi. Public buses don't come all the way to East Point. You can catch a bus as far as the Fanny Bay Jail, but that's about 4 kilometers behind us by now. Well, the other thing you could do is book yourself one of the tours about the bombing of Darwin. We run one most mornings, and that would then include a visit to the museum here. But that structure there, sort of towards our right, just ahead of us there, that's one of those gun emplacements. So it's a large structure that's open on the other side. And that's where the gun was, which was a 9.2-inch gun. That's quite large. To me it looks more like a small cannon. And that gun was then facing the harbour. The harbour is just ahead of us there, and it had a range of about 27 kilometers. So they had smaller gun emplacements here initially for 6-inch guns. They decided they wanted some bigger ones, so they started building these. But that's when the air raids also started, and they had to stop the work on it because of that. Later on, when things calmed down, they were able to finish them, and they did, and they tested them and everything, but they never had to use them. But there's another one like that on the grounds of the military